The coffee dispenser made a sound like a small animal dying, which Ben Harlow had learned to interpret as "your beverage is ready." He extracted the cup from its housing and took a sip of what the machine optimistically labeled Colombian blend, but which tasted more like someone had explained the concept of coffee to a computer that had never actually experienced joy. Still, it was hot and caffeinated, which made it suitable for enduring the next 2 hours of mandatory briefing sessions. "You look thrilled to be here," said Maya, sliding into the seat beside him. She worked in atmospheric regulation, which meant she spent most of her time making sure the station didn't accidentally vent everyone into space, a job Ben considered significantly more important than his own. "I'm practically vibrating with excitement," Ben said. "Nothing says Wednesday morning like learning 73 new ways to accidentally cause an interstellar incident." The amphitheater was filling up with the usual cross-section of Meridian Station personnel. Scientists who looked annoyed to be pulled from their work, administrative staff who looked annoyed as a baseline condition, and security officers who looked like they were mentally calculating the fastest route to every exit. On the massive display screen at the front, a rotating symbol indicated they were waiting for the presentation to begin. A blue circle with radiating lines that Ben had once mistaken for a coffee stain, until someone informed him it was humanity's official logo for "Please stand by." "Did you finish the first batch of protocols?" Maya asked, pulling up a datapad, the section about appropriate eye contact duration. "I skimmed it. Apparently, 3 seconds is respectful, 5 seconds is aggressive, and 7 seconds means I'm challenging someone to ritual combat." "That's the Corthian delegation. We're getting the Ethari this time." Right. So what's the Ethari version?" Maya scrolled through her notes. "Don't make direct eye contact with royalty at all. In fact, the file suggests treating them like solar eclipses. Appreciate from a distance. Never stare directly, and if you get too close, you'll probably regret it." Ben snorted into his terrible coffee. "Fantastic. I'll add that to my list of things to worry about. Right below, remember to breathe, and don't walk into bulkheads." The lights dimmed, and a woman in the crisp uniform of the diplomatic corps appeared on stage. Commander Reeves had the look of someone who had spent her entire career preventing disasters through sheer force of will and carefully worded memos. She did not look like someone who appreciated coffee-related sounds during her presentations. "Good morning. As you're all aware, the Ethari delegation arrives in 48 hours. This is not a drill, people. This is not a standard cultural exchange. The Ethari represent one of the most technologically advanced civilizations in the known network, and they have chosen Meridian Station for preliminary trade negotiations. What happens in the next week will determine humanity's access to technologies that could reshape our entire civilization." Ben leaned toward Maya. "No pressure, though. I'm going to need you to focus, Harlow," Reeves continued, as if she'd heard him from 50 meters away. Maybe she had. The diplomatic corps had access to audio enhancement tech that bordered on mind reading. Every single person on this station represents humanity. Every interaction, no matter how small, contributes to their assessment of our species. You will follow protocols. You will respect boundaries. You will not improvise." The screen behind her shifted to display an image of an Ethari citizen. Ben leaned forward slightly, genuinely curious now. The figure was tall and slim, with features that struck him as distinctly human until he noticed the ears, elongated and gracefully pointed, sweeping upward in a way that seemed both natural and impossibly elegant, like someone had taken human anatomy and asked a sculptor to optimize it. "The Ethari are, biologically speaking, remarkably similar to humans," Reeves explained. "Convergent evolution, parallel development, or something else entirely, the xenobiologists are still arguing. What matters for our purposes is this: do not let that similarity make you comfortable. Their culture operates on principles that are utterly foreign to ours." More images cycled through. Ethari cities that looked like crystal growths, ships that moved through space like living things, and finally, a formal portrait of the delegation they'd be hosting. At the center stood a young woman whose expression suggested she was posing for a portrait while simultaneously solving complex mathematics in her head. The caption identified her as Princess Calith Thorana, third in succession. The royal family operates under what they call the Codes of Ascension, Reeves continued. These are not suggestions. They are fundamental to Ethari society. Under no circumstances are you to initiate contact with any member of the royal line. Do not speak to them unless directly addressed. Do not touch them. Do not enter their personal space, which extends approximately 2 meters in all directions. If a royal addresses you, keep your responses brief, respectful, and completely devoid of personality. So basically, whispered Maya, be yourself. Ben barely suppressed a laugh, which earned him a glare from a security officer 3 rows down, who clearly took protocol violations very seriously, even hypothetical ones. The briefing continued for another 90 minutes, covering everything from acceptable topics of conversation: weather, station operations, the basic properties of hydrogen, to forbidden subjects, which apparently included most of human history, all political theory, and anything that could be construed as humor because the Ethari didn't appreciate jokes about temporal mechanics or whatever. By the end, Ben's brain felt like it had been stuffed with cotton made of rules. Well, he said, standing and stretching, I feel completely prepared to never speak to anyone ever again. Look at it this way, Maya offered. You work in communications infrastructure. The chances of you even being in the same room as royalty are basically zero. You'll probably spend the whole visit making sure the translation matrices don't crash, while people way above our pay grade do the actual diplomacy. She was right, of course. Ben's job was important in the way that plumbing was important, invisible when working correctly, catastrophic when failing, and generally not the sort of thing that put you in proximity to visiting princesses. He'd monitor data streams from a side room somewhere, make sure the quantum encryption didn't develop any unexpected philosophical objections to translating Ethari thought patterns into human language, and otherwise remain what he'd always been: a functional, unremarkable part of the station's background operations. That evening, Ben stood in the observation gallery, watching Earth turn below in its slow dance of blue and white and brown. The planet looked peaceful from up here, which he knew was a comforting lie. Down there, people were still arguing about whether humanity should even be out here, making alliances with beings who'd mastered faster-than-light travel, while humans were still figuring out agriculture. But up here on Meridian Station, it was possible to believe they were all part of something larger, something that might eventually make sense. His communicator chirped, a message from his supervisor. Final systems check before arrival. Translation network needs full diagnostic. You're scheduled for 600 tomorrow. Ben sighed and took a last look at Earth. 48 hours until the Ethari arrived. 48 hours until the station transformed into a carefully choreographed performance where everyone knew their lines except him. Because his lines were all code and carrier waves, and signal integrity checks that no one would ever see. He headed back to his quarters, already planning which variety of terrible coffee he'd need to face tomorrow's diagnostic. Behind him, Earth continued its rotation, indifferent to protocols and princesses, and the small concerns of technicians who would definitely, certainly, absolutely never matter in the grand scheme of interstellar politics. He was completely wrong about that, but he wouldn't know it for another 2 days. The amphitheater hummed with the particular silence that occurs when 200 people are trying very hard to appear calm. Ben sat at his console in the side alcove, a position he'd chosen specifically because it offered maximum invisibility. The translation network display showed all green indicators, which meant the quantum processors were successfully convincing Ethari neural patterns and human linguistic structures that they had something meaningful to say to each other. His job now was to sit here, look professional, and intervene only if reality itself started having translation difficulties. The delegation had arrived 6 hours ago. Ben had watched from the docking control room as their vessel, a ship that looked less like it had been built and more like it had been persuaded into existence, connected to Meridian's main port. The Ithari who emerged moved with a fluidity that made human gait seem like a series of barely controlled falls. But they looked human enough that Ben's brain kept insisting they were just tall people with interesting ear genetics, which made the whole, don't treat them like humans, protocol even more confusing. Commander Reeves stood at the podium now, delivering carefully prepared remarks about mutual cooperation and shared futures. The Ithari delegation sat in the front rows, arranged in what was presumably some meaningful hierarchical pattern that Ben would never understand. He could see the back of Princess Calith's head from his angle. Her hair was darker than it had appeared in the briefing photos, pulled back in a style that seemed designed to emphasize rather than hide those distinctive ears. "The translation matrix is holding steady," whispered Jenkins, who was technically Ben's supervisor but mostly just made his life administratively complicated. "Try not to break anything." "That's my plan for every day," Ben whispered back. "Good. Because if this goes wrong, we're both going to spend the rest of our careers explaining to very angry people why the princess heard, 'Your culture honors wisdom,' as 'your culture smells like elderly fish.'" Ben checked his display again. The quantum entanglement between the translation nodes showed no drift, no degradation, no signs that language was about to collapse into chaos. Everything was working exactly as designed, which in Ben's experience meant something was about to go catastrophically wrong for reasons no one had anticipated. Commander Reeves finished her remarks. A tall Ithari man, the delegation head, according to Ben's briefing materials, rose and began speaking. His voice had a musical quality that didn't quite align with human vocal ranges, but the translation network processed it smoothly, rendering his words into flawless English that appeared on discrete displays throughout the room. Ben allowed his attention to drift slightly, monitoring the data streams while the speeches continued. This was the easy part. Later there would be smaller meetings, technical discussions, moments where translation required genuine nuance rather than formal platitudes. But for now, his job was to be a well-dressed piece of monitoring equipment. The ceremonial portion ended. There was a planned pause, 7 minutes, according to the schedule, during which the Ithari delegation would observe a moment of reflection, and the humans would try not to fidget. Ben used the time to run a secondary diagnostic checking signal integrity across all nodes. That was when he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Princess Calith had stood. That wasn't unusual. Maybe it was part of the reflection ritual. But then she stepped out of her row. Her guards, positioned at discrete intervals around the room, shifted slightly. One touched his ear in a gesture that Ben recognized as accessing a communication channel. The princess walked past the first row of human dignitaries, who very carefully did not make eye contact. She continued past the second row, where the heads of various scientific departments sat trying to radiate respectability. She was moving toward the side of the room, toward Ben's alcove. Ben's first thought was that she must need something technical. Maybe the translation network had developed a problem that only she could perceive. He started to stand, intending to politely direct her to someone more important, when she stepped directly up to the empty chair beside his console and sat down. The silence in the room acquired texture. Ben could feel 200 people simultaneously trying not to turn and stare while absolutely turning and staring. Jenkins made a small sound that might have been a whimper or might have been a prayer. One of the Ithari guards took a step forward, then stopped, clearly receiving instructions through his communication device. Ben's training kicked in. He began to stand, formulating an apology for whatever seating error had occurred. The princess turned to look at him, and he made the mistake of meeting her eyes. They were gray, or maybe silver, or possibly a color that human language hadn't quite cataloged yet. "Stay," she said. Her voice came directly to him, unmediated by translation. She was speaking English, slightly accented but perfectly clear. Ben froze in a half-standing position that his lower back would later have opinions about. "I think there might be a mistake with the seating arrangements." "There is no mistake." She gestured to the console. "You are monitoring the translation systems." "Yes, but tell me how it functions." This was definitely not protocol. Ben could see Commander Reeves in his peripheral vision, her face doing complicated things. Several diplomatic staff members had their hands pressed to their earpieces, presumably receiving urgent instructions from someone somewhere who was having a quiet breakdown. "The translation network," Ben heard himself say. "It uses quantum-entangled processors to map conceptual frameworks between different linguistic and cognitive structures. The Ithari neural patterns are translated into human semantic frameworks through a layered interpretation matrix that—" He stopped, suddenly aware that he was explaining his job to an alien princess, while the entire diplomatic corps of humanity watched in horror. "Continue," she said. The quantum entanglement allows for real-time processing without the degradation you'd get from classical computing. We map not just words but contextual meaning, cultural assumptions, even emotional resonance when possible. The goal is to preserve intent across the translation gap. And the accuracy rate. For formal communication, about 97%. For casual conversation or humor, it drops to maybe 70%. Jokes are hard. Metaphors are harder. Sarcasm usually causes the system to generate error messages and question its purpose. She made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it was too brief for Ben to be certain. "Your machine experiences existential doubt. Only when processing human communication. Your language is apparently much more straightforward. Perhaps because we have protocols for everything." She said this with a particular tone that the translation network would have struggled with, something between observation and complaint. The ceremony was still technically in progress, though no one was paying attention to it anymore. The other Ithari delegation members sat perfectly still, which Ben was beginning to understand was their version of screaming. The humans were less subtle. He could see people conferring in urgent whispers, security officers repositioning themselves, and Jenkins looking like he was calculating the trajectory of his plummeting career. "May I ask," the princess said, her attention still on the console display, "why you chose this position, away from the main assembly?" Ben blinked. "Because no one important sits here. I'm just making sure the equipment works. If something goes wrong, I need to fix it without disrupting the ceremony. So you are necessary but invisible." "That's basically my job description, yes." "How interesting." She studied the scrolling data on his screen with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. "These fluctuations in the carrier wave, they correspond to emotional content in speech. Sometimes, the system tries to preserve tone and emphasis. When someone is being formal, the wave pattern stabilizes. When they're uncertain or emotional, it gets more chaotic. We use that to help contextualize the translation." "Show me my speech pattern." Ben hesitated, then realized that refusing a direct request from royalty was probably worse than whatever rule he was currently breaking. He pulled up the stored data from her earlier words. The pattern appeared on screen, surprisingly complex, with layers of harmonic structure that he hadn't seen in other Ithari speakers. "You see this?" He pointed at a recurring oscillation. "That's interesting. It's like there's a secondary meaning embedded in your speech. The translation matrix is picking it up but doesn't know what to do with it." She leaned closer to study the display, and Ben became acutely aware that an alien princess was now approximately 40 centimeters from his face, which was probably violating at least 15 protocols. Her ears, this close, were even more striking. The elongated structure seemed to catch light in unexpected ways. "That is intentional," she said quietly. "Royal speech includes formal markers. They indicate rank, context, social positioning. Your machine cannot translate them because you have no equivalent. So you're speaking two languages at once. Three, technically. The third layer is personal identification. It confirms I am who I claim to be. That's incredible and exhausting. Do you ever just get to say what you mean?" She turned to look at him again, and this time her expression shifted into something that might have been amusement, or might have been sadness, or might have been both. "No." The weight of that single word settled between them. Ben suddenly understood that he was having a conversation that meant only what it meant, while around them, an entire room full of people were having collective diplomatic anxiety about the conversation they thought he was having. "I should probably," he started, "return to your monitoring." "Yes." She stood, smoothed her garments, which looked like fabric but moved like liquid light, and turned to rejoin her delegation. But before she left, she said, "Thank you for explaining your work. It was genuinely informative." Then she walked back to her seat, leaving Ben sitting at his console with 200 pairs of eyes boring into the back of his head, and Jenkins making sounds that suggested respiratory distress. The ceremony resumed. Ben stared at his perfectly functional translation network and tried to figure out what had just happened. His console chirped softly, a message from Commander Reeves. "MY office," immediately after. He looked at the all-caps text and thought that maybe, just maybe, invisibility had been underrated as a career strategy. Commander Reeves's office had been designed to project authority through aggressive minimalism. The desk was bare except for a single data tablet. The walls displayed rotating images of Earth and various diplomatic achievements. The chairs were just uncomfortable enough to discourage lingering. Ben sat in one now, trying to decide if his career was ending or had already ended, and no one had told him yet. "Walk me through it," Reeves said. She stood by the window, backlit by the curve of Earth below, which Ben suspected was a deliberate intimidation tactic. From the moment she stood up, she walked over and sat down. "I tried to apologize for the seating confusion. She told me to stay. Then she asked about the translation network. And you explained it to her." "She asked me to explain it. What was I supposed to do, refuse?" "Yes, actually, Protocol 743. When addressed by foreign dignitaries above rank classification Delta, defer to appropriate diplomatic personnel." I didn't exactly have time to check the classification charts. She was sitting right there. Reeves turned from the window, her expression suggesting she was reassessing whether Ben was dangerously incompetent or just regular incompetent. Did she say anything else? Anything that seemed unusual or politically significant? Ben thought about the princess saying she never got to just say what she meant. That felt private somehow, despite happening in front of 200 witnesses. She was interested in the technical details. How the quantum processors handle conceptual translation, the emotional resonance mapping. That's it. She noticed her speech has embedded formal markers, 3 layers of meaning. I told her that sounded exhausting. Reeves closed her eyes briefly. "You told an alien princess that her culture's communication protocols sound exhausting." "I may have phrased it differently." "I'm sure you did." She sat down at her desk, pulled up her tablet, and scrolled through what was probably a very long list of regulations Ben had violated. "Here's what happens next. You're going to write a detailed report of the conversation. Every word you can remember. Then you're going to avoid any and all contact with the Ithari delegation for the remainder of their visit. You'll monitor systems from the secondary control room, which doesn't have windows or sight lines to anywhere a princess might spontaneously decide to sit." "Understood." This was a fluke, Harlow. Some kind of cultural misunderstanding on their end. It won't happen again. Ben nodded, stood, and made it almost to the door before Reeves added, "And Harlow, if it does happen again, you come find me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. Don't engage. Don't explain quantum mechanics. Just walk away and find the nearest adult. I'm 32. Then act like it. Ben escaped into the corridor, where Jenkins was waiting with the expression of someone who'd been stress-eating from the vending machines. Well, I'm not fired. I'm banished to the secondary control room for the duration. That's it. They're not launching you out an airlock or reassigning you to waste reclamation. Apparently, it was a cultural misunderstanding. Jenkins laughed, sharp and slightly unhinged. Right, a cultural misunderstanding. The princess just randomly decided to violate every protocol her species has to chat about signal processing. They walked toward the residential section, passing crew members who suddenly found the walls fascinating when Ben approached. News traveled fast on a space station, mostly because there was literally nothing else to do except work and gossip, and work was boring. Maybe she was testing the translation network, Ben offered, seeing if it could handle an unexpected social situation. Sure, that's definitely it. That's why her guards looked like they were having synchronized coronaries. Ben's communicator chirped, a message from Maya, you alive. Meet me at observation deck 3. I'm bringing the good coffee. Which meant she was bringing contraband coffee from her personal stash that she'd smuggled up from Earth and rationed like it was made of gold. Ben changed direction, Jenkins peeling off toward his own quarters with a mumbled comment about updating his resume. The observation deck was nearly empty, just a couple of astrophysicists arguing about something in the corner. Maya sat at their usual spot, 2 cups already poured. She handed him one as he sat down. So, she said, you're either the luckiest person on the station or the unluckiest. Haven't decided which. How is any of this lucky? You had a conversation with an alien princess. Do you know how many xenolinguistics researchers would kill for 5 minutes of that data? You just stumbled into their fever dream. Ben sipped the coffee. It actually tasted like coffee, which after weeks of the dispensary's offerings felt like a minor miracle. She just wanted to know how the translation system worked. And she needed to violate centuries of protocol to find out. Maybe she's just curious. Maybe Royal Ithari don't get to ask technical questions without everyone treating it as a political statement. Maya considered this, watching Earth turn below them. You know what the weird thing is? I've been reading the cultural briefings, because some of us actually read the entire file, and the Ithari have this concept called the weight of meaning. Every interaction between certain classes carries historical and political significance, whether they want it to or not. The higher your rank, the more every word you say gets analyzed for subtext. That sounds horrible. Right? Can you imagine never being able to just talk to someone without it meaning something? Ben thought about the princess's expression when she'd said she never got to say what she meant. Yeah, I think that's exactly the problem. His communicator chirped again. Then again. Then it started chirping continuously, which usually meant either a system emergency or someone very important was very upset. He pulled it out and stared at the screen. 7 messages. All from different departments. All asking variations of the same question. What happened during the ceremony? Looks like you're popular, Maya said. Then the observation deck doors opened and Ben felt his stomach drop into his shoes. Princess Kalith walked in, accompanied by a single guard who looked like he was internally screaming. She glanced around the deck, spotted Ben, and walked directly toward him. Maya made a sound like air escaping from a pressure seal. The astrophysicist stopped arguing and stared. The guard touched his ear, presumably reporting this latest protocol violation to whoever kept track of such things. The princess stopped at their table. Ben stood because that seemed like the kind of thing you should do, and also because remaining seated felt like tempting fate. I am interrupting, she said. No, I mean we were just, Ben gestured vaguely at the window, looking at Earth. It's very round. Maya kicked him under the table. I wish to apologize, the princess continued. My actions during the ceremony created difficulty for you. It's fine, really. I just had to write a report and promise to hide in a basement for a few weeks. That is not fine. She looked at Maya, who was doing an admirable job of pretending to be furniture. I am Caliph. Maya, I regulate the air, making sure everyone keeps breathing. A vital function. Caliph turned back to Ben. I would like to understand more about the station's operations, the technical systems, how you maintain an artificial environment in vacuum. There are official tours, Ben said carefully. The diplomatic corps arranges them. Very informative, probably better than anything I could explain. I have attended 3 official tours. They showed me the hydroponics gardens and explained how plants convert carbon dioxide to oxygen. They spoke to me as if I were 7 years old and had never encountered the concept of photosynthesis. Maya snorted into her coffee. Yeah, that sounds about right. I want to understand how things actually function. The quantum translation network, the artificial gravity generators, the navigation systems. No one will explain these things to me because they assume I am either incapable of understanding or that my questions carry political meaning. Do they, Ben asked, carry political meaning? She was quiet for a moment, and Ben watched something complicated happen behind her eyes. Yes, everything I do carries meaning, but that does not change the fact that I genuinely want to know how your gravity generators prevent the Coriolis effect from making everyone nauseous. Rotating counterbalance fields, Maya said. We generate localized gravitational wells that counteract the station's spin. It's extremely complicated and uses enough power to light a small city. Show me. I can't just give you a tour of the gravity control systems. There are protocols. I am aware of the protocols. I am violating them by being here. I will continue to violate them because the alternative is spending another week nodding politely while people explain basic physics to me as if it were ancient wisdom. She paused. Unless you genuinely do not wish to, I will not compel you. Ben looked at Maya, who shrugged in a way that clearly meant, this is your funeral. He thought about Commander Reeves's instructions to avoid contact. He thought about the regulations he'd already broken. He thought about the fact that an alien princess was asking him to show her how gravity generators worked, which was possibly the strangest career development he'd ever experienced. Okay, he heard himself say, but we're definitely both getting fired for this. Caliph's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile. I find that acceptable. The gravity control room hummed with the kind of low-frequency vibration that Ben felt in his teeth. Maya stood at the main console, pulling up diagnostic displays while Caliph's guard positioned himself by the door with the resigned expression of someone who'd given up trying to prevent disasters and was now just documenting them for the inevitable inquiry. These are the primary gravity well generators, Maya said, gesturing at a 3-dimensional holographic display showing the station's rotating structure. We create artificial gravity through spin, but at this scale, you'd normally get differential forces, stronger gravity at the outer rim, weird Coriolis effects that make walking in a straight line feel like navigating a funhouse. Caliph leaned forward, studying the display. So you generate counterfields to smooth the gradient. Exactly. Localized gravitational manipulation. It's not true gravity, more like convincing spacetime that it should behave as if there were a massive object nearby, even though there isn't. You are lying to physics. Maya grinned. We prefer creatively reinterpreting the rules. Ben watched the princess absorb this information with an intensity that made the diplomatic tour condescension even more absurd. She asked technical questions about field harmonics and power distribution that suggested she understood more about applied physics than half the engineers on the station. This must consume enormous energy, Caliph said. Hence the fusion reactors, Ben offered. 3 of them, running in rotation. We're basically a very small artificial sun keeping a tin habitable in the middle of nowhere. Your species accomplished this within a century of achieving spaceflight. That is remarkable. We're good at the engineering part. It's the not accidentally offending alien royalty part we're still working on. Caliph turned from the display, and her expression carried that same weight he'd seen during the ceremony, amusement and something sadder underneath. I have spent the past 4 days attending meetings where every word I speak is analyzed by both my advisors and yours. When I asked a question about your fusion containment protocols, 3 different analysts produced reports about what my interest in your power systems might indicate about Ithari's strategic intentions. When I commented that your station's hydroponics gardens were efficiently designed, it sparked a 2-hour discussion about agricultural trade agreements. That sounds exhausting, Maya said. It is the nature of my position. Everything means something beyond what it means, except. She gestured around the control room. Except here. You are showing me gravity generators because I asked about gravity generators. There is no subtext. No negotiation hidden in technical specifications. You are simply answering questions. Ben leaned against a console, thinking about all the panicked messages probably accumulating on his communicator. Is that why you sat next to me during the ceremony? Because I was the one person in the room who didn't matter enough to mean anything. Yes and no. Caliph moved to the window where the curve of Earth filled the view. I chose you because you were monitoring systems in the background. You were necessary but invisible, as you said. I understood that position, but after we spoke, I realized something else. You did not treat my questions as political statements. You simply answered them. Do you know how rare that is? For someone in your position, I'm starting to get the idea. My entire life has been preparation for responsibilities I did not choose. Every conversation is negotiation. Every relationship exists within frameworks established before I was born. I cannot speak to my advisors without them hearing policy. I cannot meet other royals without navigating alliance calculations. She turned back to face them. But you, a technician concerned with signal integrity and a regulator who keeps people breathing, you treat me as if I am simply someone asking questions. Maya cleared her throat. Not to interrupt the moment, but there are probably 20 people trying to figure out where you are right now, and at least 3 of them have the authority to make our lives very difficult. 27, actually, said the guard from the doorway. I am receiving increasingly urgent communications. Then we should return, Caliph said. But first I have a question for you, Ben. He straightened slightly. Okay. During the ceremony, you explained that the translation network preserves emotional resonance when possible. Does it work in reverse? Can your system analyze Ithari speech and tell you what we are actually feeling beneath the formal layers? Ben considered this. Theoretically, yes. The quantum processors pick up harmonic patterns that correspond to emotional states, but we don't use that function because it feels invasive, like reading someone's diary without permission. What if I gave permission? Then, I suppose we could map your speech patterns and see what the formal layers are hiding. Caliph smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. I would like that. To know if my actual meaning is reaching anyone, or if it is buried under centuries of protocol. Ben's communicator finally vibrated with enough force to be audible. He pulled it out and saw a message from Commander Reeves that consisted entirely of his location coordinates followed by 3 question marks, which was somehow more terrifying than all-caps threats. I really need to go explain this to people who can end my career, he said. Tell them I requested a technical consultation, Caliph said. It is accurate and provides political cover. Your commander will accept it because refusing a direct request from a visiting royal would be diplomatically problematic. You've thought about this. I have spent my entire life learning to navigate systems designed to constrain me. I am quite good at it. They made their way back through the station, the guard leading while maintaining what was probably a running commentary to his superiors about this diplomatic incident in progress. Crew members pressed themselves against walls as they passed. Ben caught sight of Jenkins in one corridor, who simply pointed at him and mouthed, "You're insane," before disappearing around a corner. When they reached the main diplomatic section, Commander Reeves was waiting with an expression that suggested she'd aged several years in the past few hours. "Princess Caliph, we've been attempting to locate you. I requested a technical consultation regarding your station's systems," Caliph said smoothly. "Ben Harlow and Maya Chen were kind enough to provide detailed explanations. It was most informative." Reeves looked at Ben with an expression that clearly communicated they would be having a very long conversation later. "Of course, we're pleased you found it valuable. Perhaps in the future, we could arrange official technical briefings through proper channels." "Perhaps." Caliph turned to Ben and Maya. "Thank you for your time and expertise. I hope we may continue these discussions." She left with her guard, and Reeves waited exactly 3 seconds before saying, "My office. Both of you, now." The debriefing lasted an hour. Ben explained the conversation, the gravity generators, the questions about translation harmonics. Reeves listened with the expression of someone trying to find regulation violations in a technically compliant but deeply suspicious situation. In the end, she simply said, "You're both incredibly lucky she provided political cover. Don't test that luck again." But it happened again. Caliph appeared in the station's observation deck during Ben's lunch break the next day, asking about navigation systems. She found Maya in the hydroponics bay, wanting to understand the bacterial balance in the soil composition. She attended official diplomatic functions, and then somehow ended up in maintenance corridors, asking technicians about waste recycling with genuine fascination. The station adapted. The diplomatic corps stopped trying to prevent these encounters and started managing them. Security developed protocols for spontaneous technical consultations. The Ithari delegation issued a formal statement about the princess's interest in human engineering, which everyone understood was code for "please stop panicking." On the final evening of their visit, Ben found himself back in the observation deck, ostensibly checking translation network stability, but mostly just watching Earth turn. Caliph arrived without fanfare, her guard now comfortable enough to simply nod at Ben before taking up position by the door. "I leave tomorrow," she said, sitting in what had become her usual spot. "Back to Ethar Prime. Back to meaning everything you say." "Yes, but I am bringing something with me. The understanding that it is possible to have conversations that mean only what they mean. That somewhere in the universe, there are people who answer questions simply because they know the answers." She paused. "That is valuable, more valuable than most of the diplomatic agreements we reached. Will you get in trouble for all the protocol violations?" "Almost certainly, there will be discussions. Analyses of what my behavior indicates about Ithari-human relations. Lengthy debates about whether I was testing human responses or simply being." She searched for the word. "Myself." "And which was it?" "Both, neither." "Perhaps that is the point." She looked at him. "You asked if my questions carry political meaning. They do because I am who I am, but that does not make them less genuine. I learned that here. From a technician who explained quantum entanglement, as if it were simply interesting, rather than politically significant." Ben smiled. "It is interesting, the politics we just sort of stumbled into accidentally." The best diplomatic incidents usually are accidental. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Earth. Ben thought about how his carefully maintained invisibility had somehow turned into whatever this was. Not quite friendship, not quite diplomacy, but something that existed in the spaces between official definitions. "Will you come back?" he asked. "Eventually, we are negotiating trade agreements that will require follow-up visits." She glanced at him. "I will probably need more technical consultations. I'll try not to get fired before then." "See that you don't." Finding humans willing to explain things without 17 layers of diplomatic translation is surprisingly difficult. The next morning, Ben stood in the observation gallery above the docking port, watching the Ithari vessel detach and begin its elegant departure. Maya appeared beside him with 2 cups of the station's terrible coffee. "So," she said, "that happened. Yeah. You realize this is going to follow you for the rest of your career, right? You're the guy who accidentally befriended an alien princess by explaining how translation software works. I prefer to think of it as being professionally helpful in unexpected circumstances." "Sure, let's go with that." Maya sipped her coffee and grimaced. "Think she'll really come back?" Ben watched the Ithari ship accelerate away, its drives leaving traces of light that looked like calligraphy written across the stars. He thought about Calith's expression when she talked about meaning only what she meant, about the relief in her voice when asking questions that required only answers. "Yeah," he said, "I think she will." His communicator chirped. A message from an unknown sender, text only. "Thank you for explaining gravity. Next time I want to understand your fusion reactors. K." Ben smiled and pocketed the device. Below him, Earth continued its rotation, and somewhere in the distance, a princess was returning to a life of political meaning, carrying with her the knowledge that conversations without subtext were possible. It wasn't a diplomatic breakthrough. It wasn't a trade agreement or cultural exchange or any of the official outcomes that would fill reports. It was just what it was, which somehow made it matter more.